We've got questions, we've got answers, we have the man to answer them. Jeffrey Levine from Buckingham Wealth Partners. Jeffrey, welcome back to the holiday edition of Ask the Hammer.
Good to be with you here from the North Pole.
Yeah,
Yes.
Did my letter arrive? I had a long list of wishes this year. I was good too, no coal.
Mail is delayed this year. Mail is slightly delayed.
All right, well, I'll take a snow check, I guess. So I've got a question in my inbox. It goes like this. I own rental property in my Roth IRA. Will my beneficiaries have to take RMDs from that account when I pass? Or will they have to sell the property in order to meet the RMD requirements?
So this is a challenge that many folks with hard to value or less liquid assets face when they own those assets within their retirement accounts. There's lots of advantages to, let's say, going outside the traditional stocks or bonds, mutual funds, ETFs. But when you start getting into less liquid assets, it can present the challenge because there are no exceptions to required minimum distribution rules just because your asset is a liquid. Now, for those beneficiaries, ultimately, they will be treated like other beneficiaries, meaning that based on the Secure Act's changes that were implemented beginning in 2020, many of those individuals, potentially all of them, would be subject to the 10-year rule. It's possible in certain circumstances you can continue to stretch, but the default now is 10 years. Perhaps that's good news for those beneficiaries, though, because it means that for the first 9 years after death, they don't need to do anything. All the 10-year rule says is that by the end of the 10th year, everything needs to be out of the account. And so effectively what these beneficiaries could do is they could leave the account alone for 10 years. And then in the 10th year, they need to empty it, but they could distribute the property in kind. That counts as a distribution. So it doesn't necessarily need to be sold. It can be removed or distributed from that account in kind to satisfy the beneficiary's RMD requirements.
Right, and that would be tax-free if it's in a Roth.
It definitely is tax-free if those beneficiaries wait until the 10th year. If it's within years 0 through 5, then we've got to determine how long the owner had any Roth IRAs, because in order for everything to be tax and penalty free, even to a beneficiary, the owner and the beneficiary's timeline combined needs to have been at least 5 years. Certainly wouldn't be a penalty because a beneficiary always avoids a penalty. But if we're looking about whether that growth on the asset is tax-free, not just penalty-free, but tax-free, you need the 5 years. Death doesn't get you out of that. So again, if we wait until the 10th year or even year 6, we know we've got 5 years met. If it's shorter, then we've got to look back and say, how long did the owner have a Roth before they passed away? Did we get a full 5 years before the distribution was taken?
Right. And of course, when the beneficiaries get the property in kind, the basis becomes that the value at that time.
That's right. The fair market value of that property when distributed from the account would become the basis. And of course, you want to make sure that you get a proper valuation of that property so that if the IRS questions in the future, you'll be okay. Now, interestingly, if you're a beneficiary of, let's say, a traditional IRA, you might want that appraisal to be as small as possible because that determines your income tax liability. Whereas if you're a Roth beneficiary, you want that appraisal to be as high as possible because it sets your basis for future growth.
Yeah. Well, I think in the case of this reader, the fear was that his beneficiaries would have to sell the property that he wanted them to have as part of his estate, but it seems like that's not the case.
Yeah, the only challenge that you get that might force a sale, quote unquote, force a sale, is when you have a single illiquid piece of property that's left to multiple beneficiaries. What do? Like if one beneficiary wants to cash out, how does that happen? They can't sell the property to one another because of prohibited transaction rules. There's really a very limited way about going about doing something like that. So that can be the challenge that sometimes forces those sales earlier on, not necessarily a tax rule, but a practicality issue of, hey, I own 25% of this and I want my money. I want to go pay for my kids' college. I want to go buy a vacation home. I want to retire and eat, whatever it may be, right? But that can be the complications here with those illiquid assets. If you have, traditional brokerage assets, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, it's easily split and one beneficiary can sell their share without impacting the other beneficiaries. But obviously that's not the case with, let's say, a piece of property.
Yeah. So I think we'll have to wait for the beneficiaries to write with that question to us. But in the meanwhile, folks can write to us with their questions today.
Yes, that's true. Absolutely. If you've got a question, let us know, whether you're an owner or a beneficiary or someone else entirely. You can let us know by emailing us here at askthehammer@buckinghamgroup.com. Again, that's askthehammer@buckinghamgroup.com. And Bob and I look forward to answering your questions in a future episode real soon.